All right, this is another study and stream devoted to the book Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm still reading the preface, even though I already spent 4.5 hours talking about this preface. I didn't go so far, and so this is my goal, to read it as slowly as possible and then be able to understand everything, like all topics from this book. Anyway, now I want to start by reading the part which I already covered from my memory. Preface. Supposing that truth is a woman, what then? Is there no ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women? That terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been only unskillful and unseemly methods for winning a woman? Certainly she has never allowed herself to be won. And at present, every kind of dogma stands with sad and discouraged mien, if indeed it stands at all, for there are scoffers who maintain that it has fallen, that all dogma lies on the ground, nay more, that it is at its last gasp. But to speak seriously, there are good grounds for hoping that all dogmatizing in philosophy, whatever solemn, whatever conclusive and decided airs it has assumed, might have been only a noble pluralism and tyrannism. And probably the time is at hand when it will be once and again understood what has actually sufficed for such imposing and absolute philosophical edifices that the dogmatists have hitherto reared. Perhaps some popular superstition of immemorial times, as soul superstition, which in the form of subject and ego superstition has not yet ceased doing mischief. Perhaps some play upon words, a deception on the part of grammar, or an audacious generalization of very restricted, very personal, very human, all too human facts. The philosophy of the dogmatists, it is to be hoped, was only a promise for thousands of years afterwards, as was astrology in still earlier times, in service of which probably more gold, labor, acuteness, and patience have been spent than on any actual science hitherto. We owe to it and its super-terrestrial pretensions in Asia and Egypt the great style of architecture. It seems that in order to inscribe themselves upon the heart of humanity with everlasting claims, all great things have first to wander about the earth as enormous and awe-inspiring caricatures. Dogmatic philosophy has been a caricature of this kind. For instance, the Vedanta doctrine in Asia and Platonism in Europe. All right, so now let's go on and talk about the book and read the book. So this is the place where I stopped, and it's, I guess, half of the premise. Yeah, preface. Yeah, it's gonna end up in a few pages. So let's go on. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been the dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself. All right, so he says, let us not be ungrateful to it, meaning that, to some degree it was necessary, and it made certain impact on civilization, on humanity. So Nietzsche wants to emphasize that we shouldn't dismiss it completely, But he says it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error. So for like here, he suggests to think about Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself as the worst intellectual mistake which we made as humanity, probably as Europeans, since Plato's influence was in Europe more clear than in Asia or any other parts of the world. But anyway, so like this whole sentence is the contrast between, he says we have to be grateful, right? So have to be grateful to both these doctrines, but at the same time, it's like the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors. Yeah, and well, he wants to say like pure spirit and good in itself, right? They're like the worst things. And let's just try to think about it, like why Nietzsche says that Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself was the worst error. Like, what's the problem with pure spirit, with soul, with good? Well, there's certainly a problem, since who says what is good and what is bad, right? So when you think about good, you basically have your own experience. And according to this experience, you may say that, okay, probably, this experience was good and this was bad. And then you generalize out of your personal experience and say, and therefore, like, whatever reminds me this experience is good, whatever reminds me that experience is bad. Like when you're a child, it's very hard to figure out what's going on, and you have to listen to adults, to your school teachers, and sometimes it's very confusing. So you feel that studying at school isn't good for you. You may hate it, as I hated most of the subjects and most of the teachers and most of my peers as well. So when I was at school, I didn't like to study. Although when I came to school at the first grade, I was very passionate about studying. So I already knew math table. I could calculate, and I could read. I was able to memorize some poems, even like at the age of 5 and 4 and even 3. But then, at school, everybody is equal. And if you go a little bit ahead of the class, it's never rewarding. So you're always held back, like you're always held held back by your teachers. Maybe not always, but in my experience, it certainly was the case. Maybe my feeling that tells me like I shouldn't sit there. I shouldn't waste my time sitting with people who know nothing and who can't actually study anything. And I just listen to teachers who repeat the same thing for these, idiots over and over. And yeah, maybe it helps make them, literate, whatever, but it certainly stops me, and it creates a kind of sense of disgust. And I don't like study, since I associate studying with this tiresome process when I just sit at the class and listen to teachers who can't even see what's going on. Like they see from their, personal view. There's some, students or pupils who went ahead, and there are those who are still can't understand the basics. And instead of like in my experience, so I'm not talking about, of course, I can't know what's really going on everywhere, but it seems that in schools, at least it was my experience, that teachers didn't focus on those pupils who went ahead. They focused on those who couldn't understand the basics. So we had to spend a lot of time just, repeating the same things. And eventually, I just dropped studying. I decided, okay, I may just sit there and pretend that I listen to the teachers, and and my feelings were mostly about, no, this is a waste of time, all these subjects. And then, of course, later, like in fifth, sixth grade, whatever we were studying, I didn't see the connection between real life, what was going on in life at that time, and what I was studying. So it was kind of, and nobody cared. That's another kind thing which made me dismiss school, since I saw that teachers actually didn't care about whether or not you know the subject. So they care only like about, that you are able to say what's written in the book, that you are able to understand, like, well, what the teacher tells you. But studying the subject, like being able to think and being able to, whatever, just use it. Nobody cared. Like there was a school program, and you have to go through certain, paragraphs and learn and be able to repeat what's written in these paragraphs. Whether or not you're passionate about the subject, whether or not you want to understand it, nobody cares. But anyway, yeah, it's like experience. So some like this good in itself, like one, you may think that this is good. For example, you may play video games, right? And this was again my experience from my childhood. So I thought that playing video games is actually the best thing I can do. So when I was 7 or even 6, I discovered video games. And since that till the age of 22, I basically lived in this world of video games. So it had an intrinsic value for me. So everything else was just, I obeyed certain commands like teachers, parents, whatever. But yeah, and I did everything like not because I wanted to do that. There were some things which I wanted to do, but mostly it was like, you just do it automatically, obeying the rules. And video games were like my passion, and I was playing video games all the time. And when I was able to get to there were no computers, but these special like Sony PlayStation or Sega or Dendy. Yeah, and my feelings were pro games, and my thinking as well. And for me at that time, video games were good, and studying at school was certainly bad. Now it's vice versa. So I have to well, it's not vice versa per se, since when I play video games from time to time, I still can't get rid of this passion and desire completely. So from time to time, like once a month, once a few months, I still play sometimes chess, sometimes some other games. But most of the time I just focus on studying. And now for me, studying is good. So studying, just reading, trying to understand the language, trying to improve my language, trying to improve my understanding, learning how to write better, learning how to speak better, like all this, learning how to describe what's really going on, like every day. So basically, I'm trying to, like, my purpose is describing my experience as clearly and as honestly as possible. Like every day, there are certain experiences. Every day, I might do certain things, and I try to find the best things which I can do and describe them as honestly as possible. This kind of purpose. But back then, it was just playing video games. And but when there's some schools like Plato, for example, and well, Plato is the one of the first guys who actually proposed this model. So like his academy, it was prehistorical model for modern schools. And in schools, they teach you that there's certain good. So they don't teach you just, physics and mathematics and literature and chemistry, biology, whatever. They teach you how to be a good individual, good citizen, and they teach you a certain type of behavior. Well, most of the time it's kind of obeying behaviors. There's authority like a teacher, and pupils have to copy the teacher. So basically, teacher knows something, and his task is to teach his pupils to know the same what he knows. It's not his task to make them think for themselves and develop knowledge, develop science, develop any ideas related to the subject. No, it's more about taking the information from one head and putting it into another head. And teacher, it's kind of source for information. Yeah, and so in schools, that's basically like there is certain good, and good is when you know everything, when you understand what's going on, and when your behavior is appropriate. So when you raise your hand when you want to ask a question, when you listen carefully to what your teacher says, when you are able to remember stuff, when you don't distract other kids at the classroom, when you sit quietly and obey the orders. And if you do that all the time, you are supposed to be a good person, and you have good marks, and eventually you graduate from school and you go and work somewhere. But the idea is like, is it really good? So since like Plato's idea, like pure spirit and good in itself, it's not, of course, about schools. So I'm just trying to think about my personal experience. And in my experience, like this school time, it was the worst time in my life. So I wouldn't say the first grade. So the first grade was still tolerable. Probably the second grade as well. But yeah, the third grade, okay, it started from the fifth grade, and these 4 years, like actually 5 years, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, 9 grades, it was like hell for me. And not only because of teachers and studying some stuff which I didn't want to study, but it was, I guess, of course, I don't blame anybody. I don't blame schools and system of education and teach these pure teachers who don't know themselves and don't know what's going on, and especially kids who are, all their behavior obviously were just, determined by their upbringing, by their parents. And yeah, I'm not saying that, yeah, I was such a, miserable creature. I had to go to the school and experience all sorts of humiliation and troubles and being forced to do things which I didn't like to do and all that stuff. Not just, yeah, I'm describing what was going on and trying to make sense of it, since it's in some case, like Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself, and this model for studying influenced me. So it influenced our educational system. So we have schools. Plato was responsible for these schools, and what we teach at schools, in some sense, also related to Plato's ideas of pure spirit and good. Of course, Plato is more about religion, but good in itself, like oh no, now we study science, like this idea of science. But again, science developed from philosophy. Without philosophy, there probably wouldn't be any science. We could still study astrology in schools. Yeah, it's like it's quite possible that if there was no ancient Greece and Rome and these different philosophical schools, we still lived as we lived like 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. And in Egypt, there was like, these tyrants and pyramids and whatever. It's still possible. There's just small invention. And that's why Nietzsche want to say that it's like we shouldn't be ungrateful to these dogmatic philosophies. And science also is a dogmatic philosophy. So you have to go to school, like now, if you live in the beginning of 20th century. So if you are born in a like most in a middle, class family, whatever, most of the people have to go to school. Like most of the children have to go to school. It's like 80%. And what they are taught in school, like 80% of this, it's nonsense. And they don't learn anything. It's like, well, it's not nonsense. Of course, science, they all are important. I don't deny. I just want to say that these methods and the necessity for each individual to learn like all these things in this sequence at this time, it's not useful, since most of the kids, they don't learn anything. They just pretend that they learn something, but in reality there is no knowledge. Like if you ask a kid what like who really like studies now, I try to communicate with some kids. I mean, there are chats on the internet, and from time to time I go on random chats, and mostly they're like teenagers from 15, 18, 20, whatever. And when I talk to them, I ask them about their school experience, and almost nobody likes studying at school, and almost nobody knows what's like what they're studying. So if you like, I know I'm not at school now, and I well, I for a long time I didn't study like physics and chemistry and biology. Those from time to time I watch some different courses of lectures dedicated to these subjects. But yet when I try to ask about favorite subjects, like I ask these kids, teenagers, like what are their favorite subjects, and some of the same like chemistry or biology or physics or literature. And then I start asking like questions and talking about it, and I see that like their understanding of it is like very limited. So I might tell more about physics and chemistry than, well, maybe it's because of the language, of course, and experience. But yeah, maybe it's because kids don't want to talk about it. But in general, like their knowledge is so limited. Like if you study it for job, so if you want to become a scientist, well, just one case. But anyway, once again, schools. So good in itself. It's more about religion. I guess my example is quite vague here. But anyway, yeah, my purpose is to talk for as long as possible, as much as possible, and to use this book just as a target, which I just need to pay attention to the text and use this text to provoke my own thoughts, to speak and to understand it in depth. And if I say something irrelevant, well, it may be a problem. I'm trying to be relevant all the time, but it's just my understanding. So that's how I understand it. So I shouldn't worry about being mistaken or about being vague. It's just the way how I understand it. If there's a better understanding, I'll probably find it later. But now, yeah. So just this emphasis on the most tiresome and most dangerous of errors hitherto. Yeah. A dogmatist error. Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself. Well, let me say a few words about pure spirit and good in itself. So Nietzsche obviously says that this is an invention. So there's no such thing as pure spirit or good in itself, since all good is relative. You can't say that this is like absolute good, whatever it may be, like morality, wisdom, health, life. All this is relative from a certain, like if you're you know, an old sick individual, maybe for you life is not good. And to maintain life when there's no meaning, when you can't do anything, when it's like endless misery, you wake up, you suffer from pain, You know that in next like 1 to 5 years you're gonna die. You know that there is no hope to like do anything, to have any kind of pleasure experience. You are completely useless. You probably is a burden for your family, since they all, try to do something for you, and they suffer because they can't just let you go. And yeah, in that case, life may be not good for you. You may say, oh, life, health, whatever. So it's the best way, when you really see that there's no way and you're like an old person, and just to die. I mean, to find courage, like Socrates, and drink, like condemn yourself to death, like by understanding, and die. Oh, I'm not saying that it's like this. In this case, it's this irrelevant, like a relevant case. No, maybe not. Maybe it depends on in which situation you are. So you may be old, but you still may have an opportunity to get over any kind of disease, or whatever. Maybe you may have a chance to wait until we be able to download your consciousness, your experience on the internet. I mean, now it's like certain technologies may uh, be developed to the point where you may just, yeah, it's like kind of fantasy, science fiction, whatever. But yeah, the idea is that even now, if you're an old person, you may just wait for 5 years, and then, like, if there's a certain moment like singularity or whatever, and you are able to preserve your consciousness, your experience, by uploading it on a computer. In this case, maybe it makes sense to wait for 5 years and suffer, not to die. But it's, again, it's all relative. Like, what if you may always invent certain ideas for yourself and justify your existence, even if it's not, even if it's no longer makes sense. So, in good in itself, once again, just I'm trying to find an example which may help to say that, which may help to prove that good is relative. So there's no good in itself. And according to Nietzsche, yeah, there's, in pure spirit meaning that, you know, like Platonic forms are kind of, ideas, whatever, triangle, 2 + 2 = 4. So in these ideas, they're eternal. So no matter whether or not humans exist, or any consciousness and living form exists, there's like eternal forms that are going to be here forever. And your pure spirit, your intelligence, your consciousness, which is independent from the body. So it's basically a thing which interacts with these pure forms. Again, your body, this whole idea about immortality of the soul, that your spirit goes beyond your life experience, and then, like, you basically focus on purification of your spirit, instead of just preserving your body, or maintaining your body's health. And yeah, I guess these both ideas are closely connected, since pure spirit and good in itself. So pure spirit becomes good in itself. And there's a dichotomy between life and death. So if you have pure spirit, life, it's something dirty. So, and to be alive, it's not the greatest experience. The greatest experience is to be, a virtuous individual, a decent individual, and then to become an immortal spirit and go to paradise. Yeah, it's very not now. He's going to continue and say that Platonism, it's like Christianity for the masses. Yeah, but let's go on. But now, when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we, whose duty is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. Yeah, I really like this sentence. I mean, the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. All right, but now when it has been surmounted, so eventually it has been resolved. So this tyranny of Plato has finished with the advance of science, and yeah, Nietzsche hopes that Platonism and Christianity, it's no longer a serious, intellectual, whatever. All right. So, but now when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep. And now there's kind of irony. Yeah. So he says that, rid of this nightmare, so rid of Plato's doctrine, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep. So for him, still like we're still like humanity as a whole, and Europe probably like he's talking about Europe here. So Europe still in a state of sleep. So before it was kind of unhealthy sleep. Now it's a healthier sleep, but it's still just a sleep. We still are, as an intellectual level, we are still very low as a group, as a humanity. There are some individuals who really figured out what's going on and they develop their intelligence. They try to enlighten other people, and they try to do something, try to see, try to develop science, try to develop like real communication language. Yeah, work on their language. And yeah, this is one of the most important things, since like for Nietzsche, he was a philologist, like linguist, and he clearly understands that your happiness and your life is determined by your language in the same way as it's determined by your environment. So your environment and your language, you may live in a terrible environment, you may experience like very troublesome existence, yeah, but your language, you may just work on your language and you may just learn to describe it in a way which makes sense. And in this case, it's like your experience is no longer so important. What's like your language and your description of the reality becomes the source of your happiness. But anyway, yeah, it's like developing language, like where like in Nietzschean time, when there was like, I guess 70% of people were still illiterate and mass education wasn't yet fully advanced. Like there were no public schools, and if you want to go to school, you had to pay, and it wasn't free. Yeah, but still it was terrible, even then. But anyway, so health, their sleep, we, whose duty is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. So basically, he says what's going on in Europe. There's sleep. People don't see anything. They don't really understand what's going on. They're in kind of unconscious mind state. So they live their lives. They do certain jobs. They don't think about their experience. They don't think about what was going on before, like 100 years, 500 years, 1000 years. They don't see in the future. So they live in present, like this, animal type of existence. When you are present all the time, when you just go automatically about your daily life and you don't care too much about the past, future, whatever. But again, there's two ways of looking at it. From one way, you are fully aware of what's going on, so you pay attention to the present, to the reality, instead of being overwhelmed and preoccupied with some past experiences, especially some traumas, or just dreaming about the future and fantasizing something completely irrelevant and most of the time totally useless. So it's one case of being in this state of wakefulness, and at the same time like perceiving the reality and history and all human experience as just something that is always here. So, and paying attention to uh, real real to the reality, but not just to what's going on right now, but the law of causes and effects. So basically searching why things happen and what was going on before and what led to like this present moment when everybody exists. And for Nietzsche, again, like before he says about astrology, that like in its service, more gold, labor, patience, and acuteness have been spent on any actual science hitherto. So we ask humanity what we did before. We just wasted our energy by inventing certain ideologies, certain, fantasies. So not trying to do real science, not trying to understand what is the world, who we are, what are we doing, but trying to make up something, convince others that this is true and that everything else is not true, and trying to play some kind of these games, like games of power. So when you make up a world, you convince all people that this is what's going on, and then you enslave them and make them build pyramids for you, right? Instead of just going and studying themselves in science, developing language, developing math, developing physiology, studying their bodies, studying like probably animals and biology and everything. But again, what constitutes real science? It's very hard to distinguish, since, yeah, for Nietzsche it's kind of obvious, since in his time it was let's say, it was kind of golden age of modern science, and he believed he didn't believe, yeah, but just most people believed that science is gonna create a real utopia on Earth, like a real paradise. So we're going to be able to achieve the state when we'll solve all our problems, like poverty, wars, all sorts of things which stopped us, which prevented us from like social development, personal development, etc. And Nietzsche also like thought that science is like, now what we're doing is like real science, physiology, physics. So for him, it was all quite important. But religion and some metaphysics, idealism, yeah, later Nietzsche tried to attack like idealism, especially in Beyond Good and Evil. It's one of his attacks on idealism. Other attacks, it's Twilights of Idols, when he is even more straightforward and he says like all this idealism was just nonsense. So we have to get rid of it. But in the same way, he says like, right, so we are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. So let's suppose somebody invents like a utopia, right, and castle in the air, but it's so beautiful, it's so magnificent that people are inclined to believe that this is true, and very few people can actually see through it. And this one person, or a group of people, they basically take control over the entire population by making them believe, making the population believe that this is the world we live in, and this is what's going on, like class struggle, for example. So this is the world we live in. There's social classes like proletariat and bourgeoisie, and this is the story. It's always like proletariat is exploited by bourgeoisie. The like before it was exploited by kings and whatever monarchs. Now it's like bourgeoisie and proletariat, and the goal for proletariat is to overthrow bourgeoisie and create its own order. So it's a kind of, you might consider it as a serious scientific theory, as a serious serious science like political economy, whatever. But in essence, it's just as okay, it's just a fairy tale. And science also kind of fairy tale. But you see, if you make people believe that this is what's going on, and you create a kind of huge movement, like mass movement, and there are hundreds of intellectuals who also believe that this is the case, that this is what's going on, and we have to help these poor, workers to, you know, become Ubermensch, yeah, to become superhumans or whatever. Or, you have to at least redeem them, save them from this harsh labor. And yeah, I said it's kind of fairy tale. Of course, it may be like a part of reality. Like when I say fairy tale, it's actually, yeah. Now I see that I don't like this expression. So it's like I don't like dismiss this theory. I don't like. I'm not going to say that this is like nonsense. Well, it had a certain place and I actually spent like years studying these like various socialist theories and ideologies. But yeah, the idea here is that you create this ideology, then you convince people that this is the truth, and then like nothing is, maybe so powerful to make them believe that this is not the truth. So for Nietzsche, for example, he says, guys, let's do real science. Like this is what every one of us can do. Just study philosophy, study physics, study physiology, study language. Like instead of just playing this game, trying to pretend that we already know everything, that we already know what's good, what's bad. We already know that what's the purpose of society and civilization. She says, no, it's like we have to study more. We have to understand that there are different cultures, and different cultures there are different ideas, and that what we take as an ideal, it's not an ideal. It's well, it's just an ideal, right? But reality itself, it's different. So look at the reality. Look at the history. What was going on in history? So whenever people were saying about moral, about selflessness, about morality, it's like most of the time it wasn't the case. It was exactly the opposite case. So you say that I am selfless, but your actions and your experience, which becomes clear like a few hundred years after your death, shows that it was exactly the opposite. So he was the most selfish person, but you like reversed this and kind of made it all up, and and made people believe that it's like selflessness is the greatest thing. Oh man, I have to make a make a pause. It seems I'm talking too fast, and there is certainly I'm going too much aside. Let's get back to Plato, to Plato, to Nietzsche, and read the sentence once again. But now, when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we, whose duty is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. So for Nietzsche, he emphasizes his his so he wants to say that like he draws this very famous nowadays distinction like wakefulness and sleepness, kind of spiritual jargon. So in people, these Eastern ideologies basically emphasize this metaphor. So it's like somebody who's enlightened. So this person is awake, and the majority of people there in this unconscious sleep forever, and there's no way to wake them up, and they're unconscious since because they don't think. So thinking, for Nietzsche, I guess thinking also plays the huge part here. So there are so many means of actions who actually go and do certain things without trying to reflect on them. And most of their actions are based on ideologies, like on this strive for an ideal. And for Nietzsche, he tries to really see what's going on, tries to describe the reality, tries to describe what is a man, what is the purpose for a man, and tries to develop different points of view. It's not just okay, this is the one thing. No, there are many things, and let's consider all of them, or at least those of them which contradict each other, and try to figure out, is there a real contradiction? So you may take like materialism and spiritualism, or idealism and realism, and usually these things are taken as opposite poles, and so usually people argue, like those who consider themselves materialists, they dismiss spiritualists, and those who consider themselves spiritualists dismiss materialists, and the same with idealism and realism. But for Nietzsche, so he wants to say probably that like you have to understand both, and when you understand both, you are able to see what's going on. But most of the time, people just stick to certain ideologies and can't see anything outside of these ideologies. So it's like my experience. I just want to talk a little bit about my personal way of struggling through all these concepts. So first I started thinking about it seriously after reading Schopenhauer. I already mentioned it before, but I may just say it once again, my studying stream. And this is an important experience for me. So in Schopenhauer, after I read Schopenhauer, I became kind of idealist, but it was very subtle idealism. It's kind of probably solipsism to some extent. But mostly it was kind of idealism in terms of, this reality doesn't exist. What's really here, it's just the stream of my consciousness. And what I see, what I interact with, it's just, it's as well my own invention as the thing in itself. I mean, what I see, it's not the thing in itself. The real world, it's just a projection of something, like the projection of my personal, like of my will, let's say. So the will just experience itself like through me as an individual, and looking at itself the world, which is not actually the real world, but just something that I perceive through my senses, like my eyes, my ears, whatever, and my brain interprets it. And this interpretation, it was like the real thing. So in becoming an idealist, it's basically denying that reality, no, idealism, yeah, denying that reality is real. So idealism, there's a difference between idealism and realism, which is about the outer world, and materialism and spiritualism, which is about the subject. So like an idealist basically denies that the world is real, that the world is objective. And realist says, no, the world is objective, and that's it. So in this is what is the world. So the problem with idealist, it's like it's actually you can't. Well, I don't know what's the problem anyway. The problem with the realist is that if you say this subjective, you can't actually point out that something and say this is like thing in itself, since without a subject, without somebody who perceives it, it makes very little sense. So you may say, okay, sun is there, sun is out there, there's earth, it just revolves around the sun. This is an objective reality. But then you have to understand that you know that only because your brain is able to perceive certain objects through your eyes, and you see, whatever you hear, whatever you touch, it's just your, like, you don't see the real thing, it's just an interpretation of your brain. So for that matter, you can say that if we just remove all subjects, if we remove all people who may see the earth and the sun, there's going to be no sun, since it requires a subject to be perceived. So an idealist says no, it's like there's no sun in itself, there's no earth, it depends on the subject, on your perception. So if I literally go to cave and live there, or if I'm born in the cave and I never leave the cave, I stay there for all my life, somebody brings food to me and there's enough space, to grow up and to do something, I may never see the sun, and I may never be able to understand like what is the earth, but still, like, I have, you know yeah, my life is like my experience, like for me they don't exist, neither sun nor earth. So to, yeah, so they still exist, yeah, but they exist for you and me who saw them. But let's suppose there's people who never seen the sun, never seen the earth, and they don't have concepts of sun and earth, and you can say that sun and earth still exist. So if we destroy sun and earth, or if we move to another galaxy, another star, another planet, it will be completely irrelevant, and this irrelevance is the same as to say they do not exist. Since to exist, there must be something who perceives them, something who points out at the sun and says, this is the sun, it exists. And that's why you can say that, yeah, and again, it's like all perceived through your brain. So it may be, we soon get to the point where technologies just, like metrics. So you basically are going to sit in your room, and all these materials, all this, food and whatever you need for life is going to be delivered to you by machines, and you may live in your room forever. I mean, forever meaning like you are born, you never leave the room, you sit there for 100 years or something, and then you die, and most of your life is just virtual experience. So you say, oh, well, it's kind of boring to sit in a room. No, it wouldn't be boring, since you will be connected to the internet. The internet will be a kind of virtual place, space, whatever, when you may do all sorts of things, and well, you will have less limitations than you have in the real world. And it's not that we are going to be forced to live that life. No, it's rather, it's going to be way more exciting to live in the internet than, or in a virtual space, than to live in the real space, since real space is going to be boring and less people will be, uh, you know, will be excited about it. Yeah, my vocabulary is so so rich today. I repeat the word excited all the time. Now, let's go on. Yeah, materialism. Actually didn't finish this analogy. So materialism in spiritualism, it's more about the subject. So spiritualism, it's not the subject. The subject is kind of, the self. What is the self? For a materialist, it's body and brain and neurons. And this is what is necessary to have consciousness. Without body, without neurons, there's no consciousness. And this is materialistic way of looking at the subject, not at the real world. Like the real world is this, it's about realism. And for an idealist, for a spiritualist, for a spiritualist, it's when you look at the world and at yourself, you see like consciousness is like there's an infinite consciousness, and you are like your body is just a part of your consciousness. So it's like your body is irrelevant, and this is the pure spirit. That's like what we like this idea and this distinction, and materialism and spiritualism is first like was first drawn by Plato, and this like maybe by some other guys as well, but Plato was the one who popularized it. So this spiritualism, that there's pure spirit and it has no relation to the body, and when body dies, the spirit is still there and it's alive and it's always alive. So there's distinction between materialism and spiritualism. And spiritualism was a dominating philosophy for thousands of years since Plato, I guess till Francis Bacon, or like till the 15th century, basically beginning of 15th century, and till this revolution, Copernican revolution, which changed our perception of the so-called objective world. So we discovered that sun is in the middle of our, solar system, right? And our reality, let's say, it's not in the middle, of course. Sun revolves around some other black hole in the middle of our galaxy. But the point is that before we were thinking that we are living on Earth and Earth is the center of the universe, then we discovered no, the center is not the Earth but the sun. And then like all this shift was started, and science was developed, and then we realized that we were mistaken for thousands of years. And Nietzsche wants to say that this is like, this invention, this Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself, it was kind of the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors. Why it was the most dangerous of errors? Because it's determined the course of our intellectual evolution for thousands of years. And we were, living in a world like in an illusion, basically. Most of these ages, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know anything about astronomy. We didn't know anything about science, about physics, and we were studying themselves. We were studying, the pure spirit, which was for Nietzsche just kind of deception on the part of grammar. So it kind of play upon words. So it you say something, but it has no reference point in the outer world. So Nietzsche wants to say that, look, guys, like with this revolution, like scientific revolution, like we became aware of the our place in the in the world, our place in the universe, and it changed our perception of the world and ourselves. So, and it shifted the focus, since before it was inward oriented. So science and science, it was mostly about this scholasticism. So scientists were talking about God all the time, like even modern scientists like René Descartes, for example, was proving the existence of God. Kant was proving the existence of God, and like all of them were like sciences were dedicated to something which we actually can't understand, and which is like for Nietzsche, yeah, wasn't even real. So, and Nietzsche says like, guys, instead of just doing this word game, linguistic game, let's do real science. Let's really understand what's going on in the world. Let's understand ourselves, since like there's a lot of in us which we don't understand. We believe that we're, the sinners, and we have to suffer, and our life, it's all about redeeming ourselves for the next life, next world. And Nietzsche says like it's kind of bullshit. So we have to be more realistic about what's going on. We have to understand health, our our environment, our daily habits. What is our daily routine? What are we doing? What are we eating? What are we paying attention to? What we allow to get in our headspace? What determines our actions? What determines our thoughts? All right, so duty, wakefulness itself. So I like this. We whose duty is wakefulness itself. So being awake means being able to understand the difference between our imaginary ideals and our perception of what's out there, and being able to describe it, I guess, precisely, without adding some metaphysical jargon. But yeah, before I was talking about diverse views, so materialism and spiritualism, idealism and realism. And I was talking about my experience, like reading Schopenhauer, becoming an idealist. And I said, yeah, it was kind of different. Yeah, I guess I was brought up as a, I didn't think seriously about the world, myself, what was going on. I didn't think seriously about religion. But after reading Schopenhauer, yeah, you know, I started perceiving, well, certainly I learned something about law, the law of causes and effects. It changed my perspectives tremendously. So I started seeing the reality in a different way, which was, according to my experience, way much clearer than the one I had before. And besides, I also learned, I just learned to describe things from a kind of more realistic point of view. Even though I was reading Schopenhauer and he was an idealist, and he was saying that, there's no such thing as reality, after Schopenhauer, and this was my struggle between both like poles. So Schopenhauer, idealism, and then I was reading like Fichte. He was also like subjective idealist. And before I was reading Hegel, and later I was reading Nietzsche. But I also was reading Russian classic philosophers like Pisarev, Belinsky, Dobrolubov, Pisarev, Chernyshevsky, and others, and Herzen, and they have an opposite view. So they were like pure materialists. And they didn't believe in souls and religion and God, and they tried to. There were social democrats. This movement of social democratic movements. It started, I guess, from the like in Russia. It started with Belinsky. Yeah, there was no such term as social democrats in his time, but yeah, the whole movement started developing perhaps with his ideas, and it was so powerful. I mean, when I was reading Belinsky and Dobrolubov and Pisarev, I sympathized with their ideas even more than I sympathized with ideas of Schopenhauer. And sometimes, like Pisarev made fun of Schopenhauer, for example, just saying this philosopher is already outdated, and all his wonder and all his not surprise, but anyway, so all his ideas are just castles in the air. So when you believe in like this ideal self and you just abandon the real world for this little small ego, this self, and you find all pleasure in your inner intellectual capacities. Like for Pisarev, he made fun of Schopenhauer in some of his essays, and I was agreeing with him. I said, yeah, that's exactly how like what's going on. So when you study Schopenhauer, like in Schopenhauer, there's an idea of asceticism, and it's very strong. And I remember I was like trying to get rid of my social connections when I was studying Schopenhauer, and I tried to even to get like to shut up all this, everything what was going on in the real world became less and less important for me at that time. And yeah, exactly, this intellectual, masturbation. So you study Schopenhauer, you want to become smarter and wiser. So you study different sciences, you study language, you study yourself, you write everything what's going on, you read famous philosophers, and you become more and more confident in this. So it's like you become kind of genius. And Schopenhauer, it's I guess all his books taking us one piece of information. So 5, 6 books, 10 books. So in Russian we have 6 volumes, like collected works, and I've read them all, and some of them I read many times. So it's a guide for becoming a genius. So if you read Schopenhauer over and over for 3-4 years, it certainly has an impact on your personality, and it changes everything. So you start dismissing the outer world, and you are focused on your intelligence. It's just so powerful language. Well, probably it wouldn't work for everybody, but if you're able to read Schopenhauer, like 6 volumes of Schopenhauer, and reread it, there are certainly chances that you're going to develop these intellectual, capacities way higher than an average level. And and you don't care actually about social life. That's also the idea. So Schopenhauer dismisses all these politics and engagement in social interactions with people, saying that it's all useless. You may just leave it for them. Don't try to educate people. Don't try to make anything. You may work for your posterity, since if you are a genius like Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer always emphasizes that he is a genius. That's the idea. He says, "I'm a genius. I am the most wise person living, and I know what's going on in philosophy. I know what's going on in our culture. I know all this bullshit prompted by Hegel, and only in my books you may find something meaningful, and nobody is able to understand me. So that's Schopenhauerian view on life. Nobody is able to understand me, and only like after like some time after my death, people will actually discover me, and then we'll see like whether I was right or wrong and whatever. And he was dismissed by his generation, and fame came to him only at 1840s after publication of like aphorisms on living wisdom, and he became popular in old age, so after like 60. And he was making fun of himself, saying like, yeah, now finally when I don't need anything like this fame and admiration, it came. But he needed it. He was reading all these articles in newspapers about himself, and he was very proud that finally people recognize him as a philosopher, as a genius. And he dominated, like in Germany, he certainly dominated like the last century of like the last part of the century of 19th century. That's so strange. I mean, yeah, and once again, it's like it's intellectual. So you dismiss everything what's going on, and you focus on yourself, and you go in. It's like you may compare it with like Tibetan culture. So there's like Tibetan people in Tibet, they try to pursue, like these monks, they try to pursue some spiritual enlightenment, and they focus on the inside as well as like some American culture focus on the outside. So it's roughly, of course, like there are lots of people in America who try to become enlightened and pursue some philosophy and science and whatever. And there's lots of probably materialists in Tibet, but generally like a stereotypes. So what's going on there? Like they study themselves, they study their feelings, perceptions, their ideas, and they try to avoid interactions with outer world. They don't care about material possessions. They don't care about building some civilizations, cities, technologies. It's all completely useless for them. What's really useful is just meditating and perfecting your spirit, perfecting your compassion, perfecting your love, whatever, some spiritual stuff. And here's the same, this like in Schopenhauerian philosophy, it's almost the same thing. So he emphasizes that to be a decent individual, you don't need to go and collaborate with people in building this whatever they're building. Like they're stupid. They like focus on yourself, study language, study philosophy, study other sciences, and try to maintain like good health and good perception of you know, good relationship with the world, instead of social, like the world. So for him, the real world of things is more important than social world. He says like all social world is just piece of crap. Whereas the real world, so you see what's going on, see the nature, see some patterns, see science, read greatest philosophers, read original works. Don't read some stupid summaries or some histories of philosophy or some fictions and novels. It's all crap. It's all completely useless. Next like 100 years is going to be forgotten, and nobody is going to care about it. But philosophers, they're still there. Like they're several thousands of years of history of philosophy. Take original works, read original works by philosophers, read my works, like Schopenhauer emphasizes it over and over. Yeah, no matter that you are not able to understand it now, just you'll be able to understand later. Just read. Don't waste your time on teaching people or trying to, make some business with them or do something about reality, which is completely, illusional. What's real, like it's inside. Yeah, and as I said, like from this another point of view, like PSRF and other schools, like social democrats and materialists, yeah, this is no. It's like, oh, this is useless. So it's social life. So we have to build kind of paradise on earth. This is the task. So we have to help those who can't help themselves. So we have to educate people. We have to teach them to become independent, free, stop being slaves, make them realize that they have their own minds, that they have their own consciousness, that they don't need to obey like other, tyrants. And yeah, it's basically about, PCRF, it's all about work, but intellectual work. So just criticizing, analyzing uh, some books and giving the real picture of what was going on. So interpreting the social life in a certain way and showing, like, trying to persuade people, do self-education, do self studying, becoming more aware of themselves and what's going on, like paying attention to their minds, but not like Schopenhauer, like uh, drowning in their minds, but paying attention and trying to help each other to grow, like, to do something meaningful together. Yeah, Schopenhauer, the problem is, like, for Pisser, of course, he believes that it's all possible. And he believes that it's all possible since and this, like, personal experience, it plays a huge role. So Pisser basically started at the very young age, maybe at like 16, 15, whatever. And at the age of 20, he was one of the most popular guy in intellectual, circles, right, like in the whole country. I mean, he died at 16, at the 1868, and his books like Realists and Bazarov and his analyses of Russian classical writers, I guess in 62, so when he was like 22 years old, he was one of the most popular intellectual figure in Russia. So people were just praising him, like saying, "Wow, this is like so powerful. This is this language, these ideas." And he knew that. I mean, he was writing, and he had a huge influence on, like, intellectual elite of that time. And so this made him kind of, confident in the idea that it's possible to educate people and make them, aware, rise against tyranny and create social democracy, whatever. And for Schopenhauer, it was exactly the opposite case. They both did the same. They tried to, make their peers to understand something, to learn, to study, to pursue some meaningful stuff instead of just doing, like, playing cards and drinking and going to parties and, wasting their lives, getting married and raising children, doing some stupid job, working for, like, Tsar, whatever. And Schopenhauer, he failed. That was the problem. So Schopenhauer came with the same intention, like, yeah, I'm a smart guy. I learned philosophy. I'm going to teach everybody about philosophy, and we are going to all become philosophers and study philosophy, and it's so powerful and so amazing. Studying languages and developing sciences, working on these intellectual fields, so great. And he, like, failed. Nobody listened to him. Nobody paid attention to what he was doing. He goes, "What? I was like the greatest philosopher ever. I understand Kant. I understand, like, why Hegel is an, charlatan. And I've read all these philosophers of the past. I've studied them seriously, and my ideas, they're so great, and my language is so great, and everything what I've done is so great, but nobody understands me." And he gave up. He basically said, "Okay, if you don't pay attention, I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince you that what I'm doing is really important, and you may just, do the same with me." He said, "Okay, I'm going to do it alone." And he withdrew to Frankfurt on Main and was sitting there and writing his, essays and, continuing studying philosophy. Whereas in Pisarev's case, yeah, what he was writing, it was admired by the greatest intellectual figures of his time. And of course, he's, yeah, that's cool. I like my language is so powerful, it influences so many people, and everybody listens to me, and people just praise me, and that's so amazing. And then he dropped dead at the age of 28, like, becoming a little bit more. Yeah, he was kind of rebellious in his early 20s. He was writing essays against Pushkin, like so powerful essays. Now I was brainwashed and, in school to believe that, all this poetry, like Pushkin is the greatest Russian poet, and it was golden age of Russian poetry, and everybody admired Pushkin, and we all have to admire Pushkin, but nobody reads his poems, by the way. No, but we memorize few poems at school, but nobody actually studies Pushkin. And yeah, I studied Pushkin in 2011. I read six volumes of his collected works, and I wouldn't say that I like him too much. It was just an average. Like there was few great poems maybe which I liked, but on average it was just skillful play of words everywhere. So it's just beautiful language. It's amazing. That's cool. But ideas, the meaning of these ideas, like they didn't influence me so much. I preferred Lermontov to Pushkin. But yeah, but still there's kind of admiration which was developed when I was studied at school, and everybody emphasized that Pushkin was the greatest Russian poet. And then when I read Pisarev for 2015, I realized, wow, that's like, why don't we read that at school? And Pisarev criticized Pushkin and was saying that Pushkin is a fucking idiot. Like, not using these words, but no, writing an essay, it was called Pushkin and Belinsky. There was like 100 pages, and on these pages he makes fun of Pushkin, and it wasn't just trying to dismiss Pushkin. It's like, see, Pushkin is like all his poems is just a crafty linguistic game and nothing more. There's no serious ideas. It's all just piece of crap, and everybody can do that if you like dedicate your life to composing verses. Like that's what you can end up with in like a couple of decades. Try it and you will see. Yeah, and that's kind of true, but you have to develop this passion. But anyway, so in Pisarev's case, yeah, I'm just trying to draw two analogies, right? So first, like you do something, and your environment, your social environment, kind of approves it and says, yeah, that's great, and you develop yourself just by trying to confirm the beliefs of your fellows, your comrades, right? So you write something, they say, that's great, man, go on. And the more you write, the more people are paying attention, and you develop a kind of belief that it's possible that you write more, and the more people are going to be educated and will change, like whatever social order and life, and everything's going to be better in the future. And the opposite way for Schopenhauer. So you're right, you do it great, you understand, like you can see the difference. So when you are a writer and when you pursue kind of literature career and philosophical career, you can see easily like what is your level. Again, maybe it's just my bias, but according to my experience, I'm not biased looking at my writings. Like when I was 20, 21, 22, 23, when I started writing my journal, when I read it now, I see clearly it's nonsense. It's the way I write is just, maybe it's not nonsense, but it's very limited and restricted, and language is terrible, and ideas are cheap and stupid, and sometimes I borrow other ideas of others and try to pretend that these ideas are my own. And again, my language is very, very weak. And then like 4 years more, and I see the clear difference that I reached the level which is different from what it was before, and which is close to classical writers. And a few more years, and I see that I reached the level of classical writers. And yeah, I don't need somebody to confirm it and say, yeah, now you write like Dostoevsky. I don't need it. I can see it on my own. And Schopenhauer also was able to see it on his own. And when he was dismissed by society, he basically developed this this worldview for himself. He said, okay, I'm a genius. People don't take me seriously. They don't listen to what I'm saying. All right, I'm just go inside and write my philosophy and will communicate with philosophers. So like reading and writing is basically another form of communication. Schopenhauer was famous for saying like, there's only geniuses, they communicate with each other. Like there's few people in a generation in 100 years, like, and they communicate with each other by writing books to each other. And all other people, don't they don't understand what's going on at all. And yeah, and that's basically the way of communicating with geniuses. You just read their original works, you write your own original works, and then people in next generations discover them, understand that you was a genius, and also like they're also inspired by your works, and they create their own works, and that's what's going on. Whereas on the mass level, people just read novels and watch some movies now. Yeah, don't really try to study. Don't really try to study what was done 20, 30 years ago, like 100 years ago. So if now in my social environment, it's almost impossible to uh, to talk seriously with people about something that was written like in 19th century, in 18th century, in 17th century. So didn't take it seriously. They think, oh, it's like philosophy. Come on, like now there are philosophers of 21st century or 20th century. Like why should I read somebody like Schopenhauer who lived like 200 years ago, 300 years ago? He's like 200 years ago. Okay, he's outdated. Now we have advances in philosophy and physics and science, and I don't want to spend my time reading somebody like that. Whereas yes, like in my perception, like everybody who writes now, like I can't see anybody like in 20th century, no philosophers at all. Like after Nietzsche, yeah, and Nietzsche was, I guess, the last philosopher. So after like everything what I find in modern philosophy, 20th century, whoever, Russell, Wittgenstein, I didn't pay attention actually to modern philosopher. Deleuze, okay, this guy, Heidegger. Yeah, they basically repeat everything that was written before. So when you study in depth, like German philosophy, for example, like Kant, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Feuerbach, you'll discover all ideas which were developed later in 20th century. And some of these ideas which were developed in 20th century, they are worse than original ideas developed in 19th century. So it's the same issue here as we have with Schopenhauer. So he was reading Kant, and before he was reading Plato, and basically he said like his major influences were Plato and Kant. And then he says like this guy Hegel, he basically came up with some nonsense, and he convinced the whole generation that his nonsense was philosophy. Whereas Schopenhauer says, no, Hegel is just a piece of crap. The real philosophy is Kant. And you have to go back to Kant to understand philosophy. You have to read Kant. But nobody was willing to read Kant, since like after studying Hegel or being influenced by Hegel, they dismissed Kant and said that Kant was outdated. It's like it's no longer relevant. And now it's like what's going on in 20th century philosophy. So people take some ideas, they try to pretend that these ideas make sense, but most of these ideas, they're just borrowed from 19th or 18th century philosophy, or from 15th, 16th century philosophy, or from ancient time philosophy, and they are not even developed in the same way. So you read like, I tried to read Heidegger, honestly. I tried to read this book, Being and Time, though not in the original, but in translation. And before I read Hegel, and all these ideas about being, non-being, design, whatever. It's like, I certainly saw something like that in Hegel when I was reading about his ideas of being and non-being and reality and absolute spirit, whatever. And certain, well, I did it like I read Heidegger like 6 years ago or 7 years ago, and I tried. I mean, I couldn't get through the entire book. I gave up at like 100 pages. I read 100 pages and gave up, being kind of convinced that it's just pure nonsense. That the same I was reading at Hegel, in Hegel, like 4 years before that. And well, doesn't make any sense. Just another way of expressing the same ideas. But why should I like spend my time reading some Heidegger who just tries to use his own language and his own, develop his own worldview, taking other ideas which I already kind of familiar with after reading Hegel. So this contradiction, which I between, let's say, materialism and spiritualism, or idealism and realism. So these types of contradiction, you can't really know what's going on in reality unless you understand them both in depth. So if you're a materialist and you say, oh, these spiritual guys, they're saying some nonsense, it makes no sense, and you haven't read anyone who like was writing about spiritualism, there's no way for you to understand what's going on. So you're going to be biased, and you may have your perfect interpretations, you may have your proofs and books where you may point out at these books and say, look, these guys, like, there's perfect style, they explain everything perfectly, and they criticize this spiritualism stuff, and it's just nonsense. Yeah, it's nonsense, but if you it's always mocked and caricatured, and when you see the other side, you'll see like it gives you a broader vision, and it kind of it helps you not just to understand what's going on, but you no longer identify yourself with one of these ideologies or one of these approaches. So there are lots of, like, let's take some famous examples on the internet, like this guy, oh man, wait a second. How to get rid of my screen? Oh no, what happened? Oh, okay, let's do that. So there's a guy like yeah, this guy, actualized.org, Leo Gura. And I spent, like, I just show you how many, I don't know how many hours, but in the past, like, I watched lots of his videos, like really lots of them. Well, they don't show like they don't show these red lines, but I started watching these videos at 2016, at the middle of 2016, and I was watching them mostly to study language. So for me, like, the purpose of watching these videos was like I was able to understand like 20-30% of what he was saying, but I like his clarity, how he speaks, many examples which he gave explaining this or that topic. And yeah, it's like a kind of I started watching each episode for like since 2016, I guess, till 2018. For a couple of years, I've been following like his videos, unless I actually, no, I started understanding everything he was saying probably at the end of 2016. At the beginning of 2017, I basically was able to understand them fully. So whenever I watched this video, like 2-hour long video, 3-hour long video, I could understand everything he said. And most of the time it was like, this spiritualism and non-duality, nothingness, consciousness, God, and he tries like absolute, and he uses the spiritual jargon a lot, and he criticizes so-called material science. So for him, like, most of his videos are based on this idea of non-duality, and like everything is consciousness, everything is love. And so he attempts to criticize modern science and materialist science, and he doesn't understand. Like, he says, like, he was a materialist also when like he was young, like 16 years old, whatever, And later he became a kind of idealist when he realized something. He discovered God and absolute and psychedelics, whatever. And so for me, when I like sometimes I like find these videos very hilarious and uh, sometimes profound. So when he talks about authority, I definitely agree with like maybe 60-40, 50-60-40% of what he says. But another, yeah, it's like it gives me a better vision. So now I don't watch him since he just repeats himself for the last few years. He basically repeats the same themes over and over, trying to make up some uh, metaphysical castles and explain everything through like certain ideas, basically developing certain ideologies and using this language. But yeah, the idea is that he uses a very strong spiritual jargon, and his like worldview, the spirituality and selflessness, he always emphasizes like this is the goal, like to be selfless, to perceive reality as one thing, that you are the reality, that there's no distinction between you and me, that you is like and me it's like one and the same thing. And yeah, it's a Schopenhauerian ideas, like they all stay there. And yeah, I was kind of surprised when I tried to to compare this guy with Schopenhauer. I found so many parallels. And then, of course, they both were influenced by Buddhism, by uh, Upanishads and Vedanta and whatever. And I realized that, wow, like this guy, he definitely, like, I understand everything he says. There's no way for me misunderstand him. Like I have experiences as which not psychedelic experiences, but I still have like lucid dream experience and deep studying and self-development, all this self-discipline, even like sometimes even stronger. I don't have 1 million subscribers yet, but this is my purpose. I don't want to have subscribers. I don't want to have people, I don't want to lead any cult and really try to, proclaim absolute truth, which only I possess and nobody else possesses and whatever. So, but this guy, yeah, he kind of, he doesn't understand the opposite side. He studies more and more this spiritual stuff. So for him, what's really going on? So he became a kind of centered on this idea that to prove that no, he helps. He has this exactly. This is a great analogy. So he has this piece of type personality. He started doing that. Everybody approves his work. Like not everybody, but most of the people approve his work. So he gained like 1 million subscribers, and people listen to him, and people praise him, and people say, "Thank you. You helped me too much to understand what's going on, and your videos they just saved my life, and I became such a good person after listening to your videos, and I want to do this all this spiritual work. It's so important." And since he is approved, he just thinks that, yeah, it's possible to develop this knowledge, to develop humanity, to make everybody, smart and selfless and whatever. And that's the purpose, and that's what we are doing. And since everybody pays attention to him, he has this lots of approval. He basically developed these ideas more and more. He doesn't want to go on the opposite side, for example, on the side of science. So he like talks about consciousness, infinite consciousness, spiritualism, selflessness, and people believe him, and he talks about it more and more and more. But he doesn't really study like real physics or real biology. He can't study. He tries to study. Like he released an episode on quantum mechanics. I remember it was the time when I took over the club. So it was 2017 or something, 2017. What was the summer of 2017, or maybe the autumn of 2017. He released this episode on quantum mechanics, and he interprets quantum mechanics like through his idealistic version of reality. Whereas I've watched the quantum mechanics like lectures by Sean Carroll and who else? Just Sean Carroll, I guess. Yeah, but I watched lots of lectures on in my native language in Russian, like related to quantum mechanics, but not scientific lectures actually. Yeah, I watched the conceptions of contemporary natural sciences. It's like a special discipline in Russia. We have basically like natural sciences. So, and quantum mechanics was explained there. There are a few lectures on physics, but yeah, I never studied quantum mechanics in depth. But still, my perception is more like close to Sean Carroll perception. And it's still there's quantum mechanics doesn't disprove determinism. It doesn't say that everything is consciousness and everything is just in the mind and there's no material things, whatever. But his interpretation of this guy, so it was like this is all consciousness, this is God, this is absolute, and quantum mechanics proves it. And there are many other examples when he has certain ideology and he tries to see the world through this ideology, even though he tried at the same time he says that no, I'm self-critical, I'm trying to look at both, I'm trying to improve science. But he doesn't try to improve science. He's like, well, he tries from certain point of view, but he tries to develop a dogma, even though he criticizes dogmatism and says no, there's scientific dogmas and spiritual dogmas, but he also talks about dogmas, saying that there's absolute. So he contradicts himself all the time. But what strikes me that he can't see he can't really go and study science in the same way as I can't go and study spirituality seriously. So I'm trying to read some books now I'm reading Tibetan book of death. It's actually called it's called the Tibetan book of death, but there's another kind of title for it. Okay, it doesn't matter. So in this book, yeah, I'm trying to seriously read this book, and it makes me laugh all the time. And man, there's some beautiful, pictures, notions, but in general, I can't take it seriously. I can't really, I can't on one side, I understand this is the entire culture. This is Tibet, and there's psychonauts, and they were working on it for thousands of years. There's such a long tradition, and all these ideas spiritual realms. What the ideas? Ideas about death, the between, and afterlife, three Buddha bodies, and body-mind complex, whatever. I can take it seriously. For me, it's a literature, a kind of science fiction literature. It's funny. There's certainly important some notions and ideas, but as a whole, it's just just a fantasy. And I like this fantasy, but I can't take it oh, this is real science. Another astrology, by the way, kind of astrology. Yeah, but I don't dismiss it completely. I say, oh, it may make sense for some people, but yeah, for me, it's I try to study it, but I can't study it seriously. In the same way as this guy Leo, he wants to understand science. He wants to be scientific, but he's still he's so on the other side. He can see the opposite side. He can treat other thinkers and scientists, and he basically, for him, they're silly and stupid, and he can't take them seriously, since they their language he can't. Yeah, and this is about the language. So his worldview is based on certain language, and basically to understand another language, materialistic, science, whatever, you have to learn a new language, and this is a new language. And if you interpret it through your let's say native language, you won't be able to understand the real to understand the language of science. You have to do science, and doing science basically means that you do science. So you study courses at universities. Yeah, you study physics, you study biology, you study chemistry, you study math. Yeah, but it's dull. I mean, yeah, for somebody who is like spiritually oriented, all this makes very little sense, and it's better to talk about infinite consciousness and make these linguistic games all the time. Yeah, I can see that. If uh, once again, like these difficulties which we have when we want to understand something, but we're like on one side and we can't go on the other side. It's like studying another language. It's all like I'm studying English now, and I spent how many years? Damn, I spent 8 years studying Russian in depth, like basically writing every day, thinking for myself every day, and doing poetry and philosophy and science and Russian language. And only when I started studying English, I could develop a different way of looking at the world. So there are lots of um, prejudices and maybe some ideologies. I'm not sure, but I certainly had a worldview which was how to describe it better. I don't know even how to describe it, but yeah, I was so biased and so limited before I started studying English. Yeah, it was very strong worldview, by the way. So in terms of strength and power and self-perception, so I was overconfident in my Russian language. I was thinking that I'm the greatest Russian writer, whatever. And I was thinking that I understood everything what was going on since I just got through a few hundreds of the most famous and popular philosophical works written during human history. It's not just 100 years, but since Heraclitus to modern times. And basically, I was reading uh, consistently, so my readings weren't just I pick up one book at random and then another book. It was I read one book. There's few books which help me to understand the first book. I read few of these books. Then there's 4 books which may help me understand these two. I read another 4 books. Then I read 8 books which help me to understand these two. And it's like it's always develops. Like it's always like getting forward. It's like one and the same sequence of books. One of the same. It's like I can't even tell you like. Yeah, I can remember all these not books but writers and how they influenced my worldview. And the idea here is that since I shifted to English, I started seeing the world in a different way. So I started, developing kind of counter worldview. So now it's weaker since my Russian language was, as I said, it was very powerful, but it was incomplete. And yeah, I was too materialistic, too scientifically minded, and at the same time I was kind of eccentric. So I liked Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, their language, their style. I was writing fairy tales which were like just bizarre, but I conveyed some events which were going on in a very peculiar language. And yeah, it was like it was limited. And since I started studying English, wow, now I have like different, like I have 2 eyes. So before it was like I was like a cyclope. I don't know if there's such word in English. But anyway, so I was like, I had only one eye. And this like language is just one eye. And I started studying English and like slightly my second eye started opening. And now it's still like maybe opened at one third or even 1/4, and then try to open it like fully and see what's really going on. Anyway, so I'm talking too much. Yeah, I was supposed to talk about Beyond Good and Evil and get somewhere, but yeah, I discovered something exciting which I may discuss. And for me, it's not a goal to read everything here and talk about what's written here. It's my goal is just to focus my attention, my stream of consciousness on this book and see what kind of ideas and associations it's gonna provoke and what I'm gonna talk later. So let's read one more sentence and finish here, since I feel already quite exhausted and I don't wanna lose my motivation so quickly. Of course, I may speak for 5 hours for 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 every day, or for at least 3 hours. But I know that it may exhaust it so fast, and after a few weeks, I'll actually say, "Oh, come on, it's no longer exciting. Let's stop it." So I want to preserve this exercise and read the entire book like that. So when I just read few sentences or 3 sentences, I like talk about them for an hour and a half or for 2 hours, and then next day I read another 3 sentences, and I go on for for a couple of years, just doing this studying stream dedicated to one book, and going deeper in my personal experience, going deeper in my knowledge, trying to understand it. Probably later interacting with the audience, though I don't care about audience. I mean, if you're listening to it, I don't care about you. I do it for myself. If your experience is close to mine and you understand what I'm saying, well, happy for you. You may use it for your purposes, but I don't recommend to take it seriously. I don't recommend to spend like so much time, like your time, listening to me, but do the same thing. So you take the same, approach. You take the book which you like, or this book, and of course, if you listen to me, you probably have to be a big fan of this book, and at least to read it a few times in different languages. So, and if you are a big fan of this book, and if you understand what I'm saying, try to do the same. Try to do the same downstream. Take a book, try to read it slowly, talk about the book, verbalize everything what's going on through your mind, right? Not like spend your time completely listening to me, since what I'm saying is like my experience, and try to describe what was going on in my life, and try to describe what's going on right now, try to figure out what's going to happen in the future, use the book as an orienter. Yeah, and I'm doing it for myself. Once again, it's like my way of studying language, my way of studying philosophy. It's not my way of doing philosophy, since you know I do philosophy when I choose a topic and think about it for a week, trying to understand it, and then probably after a week of thinking, I study it by looking some definitions and reading some articles and reading some books, and of course meditation. So for me, doing philosophy, it's more about few hours each morning. I do certain exercises, kind of rituals with meditation, like training my attention, training my memory, training my imagination, doing all sorts of physical exercises. So this is philosophy. So you try to figure out what kind of ideas occupy your headspace. You try to think about them on your own, try to develop them, not just by reading books and analyzing their contents, but analyzing your personal content and developing your mental faculties like attention, memory, imagination. So basically, these three, they're you may work on them throughout your entire life and develop them by using different ideas and trying to understand these ideas. The simplest way is, okay, the idea of whatever the first word, truth. Okay, let's suppose there's a need to study the word truth. What do you do? How you train your memory? You basically sit down and think about truth for an hour, trying to remember everything which relates to this word. So, okay, truth. What was the first time when I heard this word? So, what was I thinking about it? Like, what kind of books have I read? What kind of movies or songs I listened or watched? Uh, what I heard from other people saying about truth. What do I understand by this? How could I describe it like in one sentence? Uh, like what kind of other ideas are associated with this idea? So you remember. You spend the entire hour. Then you just if you want to train your attention, or maybe you spend half an hour, or maybe 15 minutes. It's irrelevant. It's up to you. Then you spend like another period of time, like 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour, focusing your attention on the idea. So you just think about truth, and you sit and wait until some interesting ideas will pop up. So okay, truth. And you may just repeat truth, 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 and try to say it with you know, different emotional attachments. So you may use like anger, like truth, or say truth, like kind of disappointment, or you may say love, like truth. Probably it wasn't love, it was some stupid emotion. But anyway, so you use like this wheel of emotions and get and put truth on each emotion, try to sense it, how it feels like when you say the word using different emotions, and see what kind of thoughts pop up, what kind of, you may think about truth, and you may try to focus your attention on this idea, and then suddenly there's some person like appears on your mental horizon. So you think about certain individual, and you, oh, why this individual came to my mind, like how is it relevant to truth? And then again, you just start thinking, and probably you're writing all this down. So it's not just simple thoughts, but okay, certain individual came to your like mental horizon. You write down, okay, I was thinking about truth, and then I recalled this person, and why did it happen? You start writing down, like you write down the question, like why did it happen? Then you sit down, wait, there's some another answer pops up, and you basically just write a few pages thinking about like truth, train your attention, and then train your imagination. Basically try to make up a story or write a poem, or just think, about the development of this idea. So you just think, okay, like people tend to believe that truth was, X, like good in itself, whatever, Plato. Then, like nowadays, we consider it more like a spiritual jargon. So whenever people are talking about truth, it's kind of absolutist way of speaking, and usually it's very hard to argue with these people, and it's better to leave them alone with their truths. And probably in the future, it's like whether or not this idea is going to be influential. This is thinking, this is doing philosophy. So you study like your personal content, your experience through the lenses of this idea. And when you like exhausted, and the truth about it is that if you have time, if you have leisure, it's very hard to exhaust any idea. See, if you take the idea of truth, you may dedicate the rest of your life, no matter how old you are right now. You may spend 50 fucking years just studying one idea and developing it, and you will never be able to exhaust it if you know how to think. So if you develop your intelligence to the level when you really may focus your attention on one idea, if you have no, like, nothing to do in life, which is the natural state for a philosopher, basically you study what's going on, you may be uh, preoccupied with this idea and spend like the rest 50 years. And the more you study, see, the point is, the more you study, the more exciting it becomes. You may think, oh, there's probably not so much to think about truth. Probably I'll be able to, you know, write everything and understand everything in just one day. And you spend like 3 hours thinking about it, and then now I already know everything. But if you repeat the same exercise for a week, trying to start it from the beginning, especially if you write everything down, you'll discover that you learned something new, that you realized something that you couldn't understand before. And then, of course, like if you continue for a month, you'll become a kind of expert in truth, and you'll discover that nobody understands what actually is truth, since nobody studies it. And you studied it, and you are thinking about it for 20 hours or 30 hours or 50 hours. And then it's like you may take a book written by Schopenhauer or Nietzsche or somebody else, and oh, this guy was thinking about it for 50 hours too. Probably I'll be able to find something meaningful. And then you may find, one sentence which will make you think about another concept. So to understand truth, you probably take the idea of duty. Just stupid example, what I saw in front of me. So, okay, duty probably is going to help me to understand the idea of truth. And you start thinking about duty in the same way for 20, 30, 50 hours. Then you think, now you realize something. Then you come back to idea of truth, try to understand try to develop this idea further. And it's endless. So you may do it all your life, and you will never be able to reach the final point and say, this is the truth. This is like everything what may be said about this idea, since Each new experience may bring up new possibilities, new thoughts, new experience, which will deny the previous experience, or which will enrich it, or which will make it different, whatever. See, this is real thinking. This is what's going on when you study philosophy or study something. But anyway, yeah, let me read the last sentence and finish this studying stream. It amounted to the very inversion of truth and the denial of the perspective, the fundamental condition of life. To speak of spirit and the good as Plato spoke of them. Indeed, one might ask, as a physician, how did such a malady attack that finest product of antiquity, Plato? Had the wicked Socrates really corrupted him? Was Socrates, after all, a corrupter of youth and deserved his hemlock? All right, so I guess, yeah, I wouldn't analyze this sentence. So it's like it's kind of different. It's almost a different paragraph. Like I'm going to talk about Socrates and corruption and Plato next time. Yeah. And I'm going to finish today. So I started here and read a few sentences. I'm going to memorize these sentences. I already know them. I mean, I memorized this preface more than a year ago, and I know it in my memory, but I didn't repeat it for a year, so I need to re-memorize it once again. And it takes me just 5 minutes. I mean, next stream, I'll start from reciting like the whole thing, like from the beginning. But now let me read it once again and, probably talk about it for a few minutes more, and then I'll finish. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been made a dogmatist error. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must be certainly. I'm trying to learn to read for 4 years in English. My Russian English is almost perfect. So I recorded few audiobooks. Well, I didn't actually. I recorded, let's see, I recorded one audiobook. I tried to record a few, but I didn't finish. So I recorded one audiobook by Carlos Castaneda, The Journey to Ixtlan, in Russian language. And I perfected my reading style to the degree which was like, I wasn't just happy with the level I was able to read it. I was what's the idea? What do I want to say? So I want to say that it was very, like, usually when you read something, you think, oh, probably I can do better. Probably I can do better. And I perfected it to the point when I was saying, wow, this is perfect. Like I can do only worse. Well, of course, it wasn't perfect actually. Yeah, I still could do better, but it was so good that I was impressed by my own way of reading. And yeah, it's about intonation and playing with different tones. And this in this book by Carlos Castaneda, there's two characters, mostly like Castaneda and Don Juan. And to read the book, so sometimes you have to change between two characters. So when they have a dialogue, I used different types of voice. And one voice was something like this. So in English, I can't even repeat it. So I'm talking monotonously, and I'm aware of that. I'm trying to like change it. I'm trying to work on it. But in that book, I was using like 3 distinct types of voice. So I was able to read like author text and 2 dialogues, and I was able to differentiate between 3 these voices, and it was so powerful. I mean, I very like to listen to my own recordings, but in English, man, It's just like 4 years. I already spent like 4 years practicing my reading, and I've read like for 40. I read for about 40 books in English so far, and I mean long books like 400-500 pages. Or maybe not all of them were 400-500 pages, but on average it was like let's say 40. How many? 20,000 pages. It's like 15,000 pages, something like that. So I already read in English, but it's just books, right? But besides, I read countless articles and just small pieces of texts, poems, etc. But okay, let's say I've read like in books, like real books, something like this. So I've read 40 for about 40 books, and it was 15,000 pages. And I would say that I was training my reading skills. So it wasn't just silent reading. Quite often I read aloud, and I tried to improve the way how I was reading. And still so fucking weak. But yeah, I hope maybe in the next 5 years I'll be able to read it. To improve this technique. I probably need to take some exercises to type a question how to improve the quality of your reading aloud, and do some exercises. I do lots of exercise and pronunciation, but it's still not enough. Anyway, so let me read it once again. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must be again. Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors hitherto has been a dogmatist error, namely Plato's invention of pure spirit and good in itself. But now, when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we, whose duty is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered. All right, so I guess it's enough for today. But before I finish, so let me just talk for a while and explain. Try to kind of wrap my head around these two sentences. So this ideology, this good in itself and pure spirit, according to Nietzsche, was the worst thing invented by our intellectual capacity, by us, by humans, and it caused lots of harm and damage. So it prevented us from developing what Nietzsche calls like real science. So it prevented us from, it basically made us suffer unnecessary for thousands of years. Well, not unnecessary, of course, but it also was quite powerful, since this suffering, this tension, which these ideas brought up, it made us very strong and in the same time on the intellectual level. And now when this tension has been relieved and Europe was freed from this dogmatism, now we are so strong, we have such a strong intellectual capacities, and well, it's definitely is going to help us to put humanity forward, put our species, put our whatever there is, put our consciousness and philosophy and science. So on one side, again, he emphasizes like let us not be ungrateful to it, but on the other, he says this was the most terrible mistake of humanity. What was the most terrible mistake? The invention of pure spirit and good in itself. Yeah, that's all. Good in itself, all dogmatism. All right, I don't know. I was talking about it for quite a while. I guess it's a nice place to stop. I'm trying to do. No, I had some problems recently, like after recording my first studying stream, and the second one, I had some problems with sleep. I noticed that it had an impact on my health and my behavior. I also had some problems with my physical, state, with my physical condition. So I started getting tired faster, and my physical energy, like the level dropped. So that's why, like, first I was thinking that I'm gonna record this studying stream on a daily basis and talk for 3 hours. Now I see that it's quite impossible, so I don't want to exhaust myself so fast. I want to continue doing that. And since there's nowhere to hurry, I mean, nowhere to rush, I don't need to do it. Like, nobody forces me to record these studying streams. I do them on my own since I really like the book and I really want to think about it and record these videos, talk about it, improve my language, work on my language using this book. Since nobody forced me, I can do that maybe not as often as every day. Maybe I can do it every second day, or maybe once a week if I feel really terrible. So I don't want to ruin my health sitting at the computer for 3 hours every day and talking about beyond good and evil. If I feel better, if this new experience, new studying streams wasn't the reason, and maybe there were some other reasons, like physiological reasons, which like changed my health and my daily routine to some degree. So I'll probably will like return and do it on a daily basis. But the idea, yeah, I want to get through this book as slowly as possible, and ideally like dedicate 1,000 hours to reading this book and doing it almost in the same way as I'm doing it right now. So I was thinking also about memorizing the book, like at least, this idea occurred to me a few times. I know the preface, it didn't took me too much time to learn the preface. So I spent back in 2019, I spent maybe, no, 3 hours, maybe even less than 3 hours, memorizing the preface. And then I repeated it maybe like 20, 30 times, trying to think about it. And, but I was doing it, when I was walking. So it basically was kind of, it wasn't memorization, it was something that I enjoyed to do or enjoyed doing. And therefore I couldn't say that I spent like more than 3 hours working hard on this memorization thing. But it's kind of, I'm curious whether or not it's possible to memorize the entire book. I definitely can try to do that since I read it slowly. And like these two sentences, I don't need to memorize them, I already know them. So now I need just to read it once more, and it'll take just a few minutes to remember. But the question is, am I capable to keep in mind like this entire content if I repeat it from time to time, like once a week, let's say, like the whole book, and add every day when I record the video a few more sentences? So ideally, I must be able to memorize the entire book. If it'll take me like few hours, that's okay. But another problem may be that it may, be a kind of burden. I mean, to repeat it over and over, I think it's not necessary. And so I'm still, I haven't decided yet whether or not I'm going to memorize the entire book, but at least I try to stick to this schedule. I'll memorize preface, like the preface, which is like half of the preface has done. So I assume that in the next 3 days I'll finish studying the preface, like studying my I'll finish my studying streams centered on the preface. I'll remember the entire preface, and then when I start reading other, like the first chapter, I'll see if I have enough strength. I'll try to remember like everything, unless I'll feel that there's no way to go on, and then I'll probably remember some parts, since there are so many amazing paragraphs which I usually, when I read, I just, wow, that's so wonderful. It's like they help me to understand so many things. But I often find myself, in a conversation, for example, there's some, I have to say not I have to say, but yeah, I have a conversation. We discuss certain, determinism, for example, and I clearly remember that, this in this book, in Beyond Good and Evil, there's few paragraphs dedicated to determinism, and whenever I read them, I was, wow, that's so clear. It's like he expresses exactly my ideas, and it makes me feel so, you know, so enlightened. But whenever I have to describe something like that, I can't say, you know, 5 6 sentences and connect them to each other so that they will make the same. Like, it's, again, the point is that whatever he says, he says the same thing which I understand, but the way of expression, how he says it, it's very different. And uh, like, if I memorize this paragraph, it wouldn't improve my understanding, but it will improve my ability to, to communicate with people and impress them, and, probably convince them in something, which is completely useless for me, since I don't set a goal to, to educate somebody or to teach somebody. It's not what I really aim at. But anyways, like, use these ideas and sometimes apply them for a conversation, maybe also funny, like, to consider it as a kind of, entertaining stuff. I'll probably memorize few paragraph about free will and determinism as well. Anyway, so it was kind of exciting stream. It's the third stream dedicated to this book, and comparing it with the previous streams, I would say that, like, the first one was the best, the second was the worst, and this is in the middle. It's exactly in the middle. Like, that's how I feel. So I feel I said many, like, unrelated things, but that's okay. So in general, like, this whole few hours while I was talking, I basically felt quite awesome, and I'd like to get further and develop better feelings. So one of the idea behind this stream also is, like, to learn to have certain emotional experience while just talking. And I know that there's, such great experiences when you just do self-talk and you discover something that was, that, that was always there, but you couldn't really understand it. And then you start talking and you discover something else, and it helps you to understand some previous experience. And you may just, experience kind of awe, and not awe, but anyway, you may experience certain emotions which are not available in a normal state just by doing self-talk. And this book, yeah, I guess is going to help me to reach these types of experience. Yeah, that's all. So see you next time.